Leaving you was the best choice I ever made. Derek Mercer said it with a smile, a champagne flute in his hand, standing only a few feet away beneath a white wedding tent in Charlottesville. My cousin's string quartet played softly in the background, as though the timing had been planned by fate itself. Around 120 guests filled the tent, not counting the catering staff weaving through the tables with silver trays of crab cakes and champagne. My mother sat just 2 seats to my left. My cousin Celia's church friends occupied table 6. Derek's mother stood about 20 feet away in a blue silk jacket, pretending not to notice her younger son embarrassing his former wife at a family wedding. I didn't answer. I simply looked at him and realized with surprising calm that bitterness had changed him. He still wore the confident smile that once impressed everyone. His tailored suit was expensive, and his cufflinks reflected the warm lights hanging across the tent. But the life had faded from his eyes. 5 years earlier, when I was 42, I had been naive enough to believe that feeling loved also meant being safe. Then a little girl in a pale yellow dress ran across the dance floor, wrapped her arms around my legs, and rested her cheek against my skirt. "I love you, Mommy." The conversation around us stopped. Somewhere near the head table, a fork lightly struck a china plate. Behind me, the tent flap opened. Dress shoes crossed the wooden floor. I didn't need to turn around. By then I knew the steady rhythm of his footsteps, the walk of a man who had spent years entering rooms where people either lied for a living or finally told the truth because they had no other choice. That was the moment Derek Mercer discovered that 5 years is a very long time to underestimate a woman he once believed he could control. My name is Evelyn Mercer, Evie to the people who have earned that privilege. I was 47 that evening at my cousin's wedding, a senior probate paralegal in Richmond, Virginia, and the mother of a 4-year-old girl I hadn't given birth to but loved with every part of my heart. After life took so much from me, she became the greatest gift I had ever received. This is the story of the night my husband betrayed me with my closest friend, and of the 5 years that followed when I learned that silence is not surrender. Grief is not weakness. Sometimes walking away with your dignity is the first step toward justice that no one expects. 5 years earlier, on my 42nd birthday, I left work at 4:30 because my husband had texted me 3 times before noon, reminding me to be home by 6. "Don't be late, birthday girl. I've got a surprise." The truth is, Derek never enjoyed surprising other people. He enjoyed being in control. He enjoyed making an entrance. Most of all, he liked the image of being generous, the moment people admired him and thought he was the perfect husband. If he bought flowers, he expected pictures. If he booked a restaurant, he wanted the hostess to recognize his name. If he gave me birthday earrings, he expected my gratitude to be loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. By 42, I already understood those habits. I simply stopped talking about them. I worked at a probate and estate litigation firm on East Main Street in an old brick building with narrow windows and an elevator that complained on every floor. Every day I handled other people's endings: wills, trusts, inheritance disputes, family property battles, grieving widows, angry children, and handwritten codicils discovered in desk drawers after funerals. I became good at my job because I learned one important lesson. The worst betrayals usually happen in comfortable homes filled with framed family photos. Greed rarely announces itself. Sometimes it arrives carrying a casserole. Sometimes it hides behind a warm smile. Sometimes it looks exactly like a husband promising a birthday dinner. That afternoon, I left the office carrying a lemon cake from the bakery downstairs because my assistant, Nina, insisted no woman should go home empty-handed on her birthday, even if her husband claimed to have special plans. I placed the white bakery box on the passenger seat of my Lexus and drove through Richmond traffic with the radio playing quietly and the windows cracked open, just enough to let in the smell of rain-soaked pavement. A brief Virginia spring shower had passed earlier that day, leaving the sidewalks steaming, while magnolia blossoms clung to the curb like scattered silk. By then, Derek had been acting differently for months. Different is simply the kindest word I can use for someone who had already started building his life around lies. He worked in wealth management, or at least that's what he liked to say. His actual job title changed every few months, depending on which business cards he had printed most recently: investment advisor, legacy planner, boutique financial consultant. He wore tailored navy suits, shook the right hands, and spoke confidently about investment strategies while forgetting to pay the gas bill. He understood how to talk about money much better than he understood how to manage it. For too many years, I confused confidence with competence. I also mistook my best friend's loyalty for genuine love. Vanessa Cole had been part of my life for 15 years. We met when I was 27 and trying to look older in legal offices where every woman under 30 was called girl, no matter how much responsibility she carried. Vanessa had an easy sense of humor that made every room feel lighter. She had thick, dark hair, quick movements, and a habit of finishing my sentences as though we shared the same thoughts. She worked in private trust administration at a regional bank and knew more about old Virginia wealth than anyone I had ever met who hadn't inherited it. We met for brunch every other Sunday. She knew exactly what tea my mother preferred during migraines. She had a key to my house. She stood beside me frosting Derek's 40th birthday cake while telling me I was the only person who truly understood her. If someone had asked me at 42 who would never betray me, I would have answered with two names without hesitation. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, everything looked perfectly normal. The porch lights were glowing. The hydrangeas were beginning to bloom. Derek's Mercedes sat in the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see warm lights and flickering candles. For one brief moment, I smiled. I carried the lemon cake in one hand and my laptop bag in the other, pushed the front door closed with my hip, and called out, "Derek?" No answer. I placed the cake beside the mail on the foyer table and listened. Soft music drifted from upstairs. It sounded like Nat King Cole, though the volume was too low to be certain. Then I caught the smell of seared steak, butter, and the expensive perfume Vanessa always wore when she wanted to feel confident. I stood still. People describe intuition as something loud and immediate. Mine has never worked that way. It comes quietly, the moment a room stops making sense and your mind notices every detail before your heart is ready to accept the truth. Vanessa's perfume. At 6 o'clock, inside my home. Without saying another word, I walked upstairs. I noticed strange little details as I climbed. The second step still creaked along the left side. The hallway lamp needed a new bulb. Derek's loafers had been left half under the bench outside our bedroom. The bedroom door stood slightly open. Light from the hallway slipped through the narrow opening in the bedroom door. I pushed it open with my fingertips. Vanessa was sitting in my bed, wearing nothing except my husband's white dress shirt. Derek sat against the headboard without a shirt, one hand resting on her leg. He looked less shocked than interrupted, like someone already preparing an explanation before a question had even been asked. No one shouted. No one rushed toward anyone. Nothing was thrown across the room. Vanessa was the first to lose her composure. The color drained from her face. Derek spoke my name the same way people say "wait" when they know a lie is coming. "Evie?" I didn't answer. My eyes moved across the room. I looked at the bed, then at the chair near the window where Vanessa's black dress had been folded over the armrest. Hanging from the strap of her purse was my gold bracelet, the one my mother had given me for my 40th birthday. It looked as though she had removed it without a second thought. Then I noticed the laptop. It sat open on Derek's side of the bed, its screen still glowing in the dim light. At first, I recognized only the familiar layout of trust documents, distribution tables, account notes, signatures, and financial records. Then I read the title, Helen Mercer Family Trust. Helen Mercer was Derek's mother. Below the account summary was a transfer record that immediately caught my attention. The feeling in my chest changed. Before either of them could react, I stepped forward, picked up the laptop with both hands, and pulled it away. Derek moved a second too late. "Evie, don't." Without looking at him, I raised one hand. "Don't speak." My voice sounded calm, almost unfamiliar. Vanessa pulled the sheet tightly around herself. "This isn't what it looks like." I turned toward her. Even decades later, I don't think I'll forget the confidence it took for her to say those words while sitting in my bed, beside my husband, with my bracelet hanging from her purse and his family's trust records open on the computer. "No," I replied quietly. "It's worse." The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the bedside lamp. I looked back at the screen. A transfer had been flagged and later reversed manually. The initials attached to the entry belonged to neither Derek nor Helen. The transaction was dated 3 weeks earlier. It also referenced a charitable sub-account that Helen had established after Derek's father passed away. In the lower corner of the document was the watermark from the trust office where Vanessa worked. That was enough. I didn't know every detail yet, but I understood the outline. My husband was having an affair with my closest friend. My closest friend had access to confidential trust records belonging to his family. And on my birthday, both of them had left evidence of possible financial misconduct open on a laptop in my own bedroom, convinced I would never come home early enough to see it. I closed the laptop. I picked up Vanessa's dress from the chair and dropped it beside her. Get dressed. Then I looked directly at Derek. Before I return for the rest of my belongings, I want every password for our joint accounts written down and waiting on the kitchen counter. If a single dollar moves tonight, I'll know. He stared at me as though he had never heard me speak that way before. Perhaps he never had. I walked out carrying the laptop, my car keys, and the lemon cake I had brought home for my own birthday. By midnight, I knew my marriage had ended. By 1 o'clock in the morning, sitting across from my mother at her kitchen table, with the laptop open and a legal pad beside me, I realized the affair was only a small part of what had happened. My mother's kitchen had always been the place where difficult facts became easier to examine. It wasn't because the room felt comforting. It was because my mother wasn't a woman who avoided reality. Marianne Holt was a retired middle school principal with silver hair, perfect posture, and a habit of listening to bad news with her hands folded neatly in her lap. Someone who didn't know her might mistake her calm for indifference. They would be wrong. That kitchen on Grove Avenue had witnessed every major hardship in my life. It held the meals after my father's funeral. It witnessed my first college rejection. It was where we received the phone call that my appendix had burst when I was 23. It was also where Derek proposed, and where I admitted to my mother months before the wedding that I wasn't completely certain I was making the right decision. I married him anyway. That room taught me an important lesson, that a woman can face humiliation without allowing it to control her. At 1 in the morning, on my 42nd birthday, I sat there wearing my office clothes while my mother heated water for tea I knew I wouldn't drink. She placed the kettle on the counter, studied my face, glanced at the laptop, and asked the only question that mattered. What did you notice besides the obvious? That was exactly why I had gone to her instead of calling a friend. A friend might have focused on the betrayal or suggested getting revenge. My mother believed emotions could wait until the facts had been organized. I turned the laptop toward her and pointed at the transaction log. This is Helen's charitable sub-account. Derek shouldn't have direct access to it, and Vanessa definitely shouldn't have trust office records saved on his personal computer. She adjusted her glasses. What exactly am I looking at? A reverse transfer. Money moved out, then came back. Maybe someone got nervous. Maybe someone realized there was too much documentation. I pointed again. See that notation? It references an interim distribution approval. Helen would never authorize something like that without copying Graham. She doesn't even order landscaping for her backyard without informing him. My mother nodded. She knew the Mercer family the way longtime Richmond residents quietly know one another's histories. She had met Helen Mercer through church events and charity functions. She knew Graham Mercer by reputation, the older brother, the attorney with a careful reputation and a spotless record. And she knew Derek through years of small inconsistencies that had slowly added up. Late tax payments, vague explanations, and charm that often felt rehearsed. Can you prove what this means? She asked. Not tonight. Can you prove what it could mean? That question made me stop and think. She stood beside the kettle in the same blue cotton robe she wore every evening after 9, regardless of who visited or what season it was. There was no panic in her expression, no sympathy, only the quiet expectation that if I wanted answers, I would need to think clearly. Yes, I said. I believe I can. She nodded once. Then sit down and think. I'll make the tea anyway. I never slept that night. Instead, I filled page after page on one of my mother's yellow legal pads. After 20 years working with probate files, trust disputes, guardianship hearings, and inheritance battles, I had learned something important. Betrayal almost never arrives all at once. It usually begins with small steps: a borrowed checkbook, a questionable signature, a relative who insists they're only helping with paperwork. The first rule in cases like those is simple: never rely on memory alone. Write everything down before exhaustion or embarrassment begins changing the details. So at 1:30 that morning, while the remains of my marriage sat 15 minutes away, I began making the first list that would eventually uncover everything. What I knew without any doubt was simple. Derek and Vanessa were involved in an affair. The document displayed on Derek's personal laptop carried the watermark from Vanessa's trust office. It belonged to the Mercer Family Trust. A transfer entry referred to a charitable sub-account managed by Helen Mercer, and the transaction had been reversed. The record was dated 3 weeks earlier. That laptop had been sitting open in my bedroom while my husband and my closest friend were in my bed. Those were the facts on the first page of my notes. The second page was far more difficult because it forced me to stop pretending the previous year had been ordinary. Over the past several months, Derek had started asking more questions about trusts and estate management. He always sounded casual, as though he was simply curious. How does a successor trustee actually take over? Can a beneficiary request a temporary distribution if the trustee is getting older? If there's a charitable account inside a larger trust, who approves any changes? At the time, I answered without giving it much thought. That's what spouses do when someone shows interest in their work. I assumed he was making conversation or trying to understand the legal field I worked in every day. Looking back, those questions no longer seemed innocent. Vanessa had also begun mentioning Helen Mercer more often. Nothing she said felt suspicious at the time. She spoke the way trust officers often do, carefully avoiding confidential details while still talking about general situations. She would make comments such as, "Some of these old Richmond families make everything more complicated than it needs to be." Or she'd laugh and say, "You'd be surprised how many people think a charitable account can become a family checking account if nobody pays attention." One afternoon over shrimp and grits at Stella's, she joked, "If I were ever assigned to handle my best friend's in-law's trust, I'd remove myself from the case immediately." I laughed with her. Back then, it sounded like a random comment. Sitting beneath my mother's kitchen light, while my birthday still had less than an hour remaining, I realized it hadn't been random at all. Other memories started fitting together. After Derek's father passed away, Derek volunteered to help Helen organize paperwork. That had seemed thoughtful because families often need help after a loss. The strange part was that Helen had always been exceptionally organized. Every statement, receipt, and financial record was neatly filed in color-coded folders. Still, Derek insisted on helping simplify everything. More than once, he complained that Graham controlled the trust too closely. "You'd think he was the only son she has," he once said with obvious frustration. I should have paid closer attention to the bitterness in his voice. Around the same time, Vanessa canceled brunch with me twice in 1 month because of what she described as late meetings at the bank. Yet on one of those evenings, Derek came home carrying the same expensive perfume Vanessa always wore. He told me he had spent the evening meeting with a client from Williamsburg. I remember standing at the stove stirring soup while he loosened his tie and kissed my cheek. For just a moment, I thought, that smells like Vanessa's perfume. Then I dismissed the idea. I convinced myself I was tired, imagining things, and being unfair. Too many women spend years trying to give dishonest people the benefit of the doubt, while those same people continue betraying them. Around 2 o'clock that morning, my mother placed a plate of toast beside me. I never touched it. Instead, I enlarged the trust document on the laptop, trying to read the smaller notes more clearly. Derek had also been careless with his computer history. Maybe he assumed discovering the affair would leave me too overwhelmed to notice anything else. Maybe he believed heartbreak would stop me from thinking logically. Whatever the reason, he was wrong. Inside the recent documents folder, I found 3 additional files connected to Helen Mercer's trust. One contained a scanned authorization form signed by Helen. Another listed balances for several trust sub-accounts. The third was an email draft that had never been sent. It was addressed to Vanessa's work email. The subject line read, "Need this before Graham reviews the quarterly statement." I leaned back so quickly my chair scraped across the kitchen tile. My mother looked up from rinsing the kettle. "What is it?" Without speaking, I turned the laptop toward her. She quietly read the subject line. After a long pause, she pressed her lips together. "Well," she finally said, "that answers one question." I looked at her. "This isn't only about an affair anymore." A short laugh escaped me, though there was nothing amusing about the situation. The betrayal I had walked in on only hours earlier suddenly seemed like one piece of something much larger. "No," I answered quietly, "it isn't. Enough to protect you. Enough to alert his mother's trust administrator before anything else could disappear." I brought the laptop, my phone, and the first legal pad from my mother's kitchen. Lydia spent the next 90 minutes walking me through what mattered most. Not what hurt the most. What mattered the most. We printed the email draft. We saved the browser history. We copied the trust files onto an external drive she took from a locked drawer. We listed every shared account Derek and I had, every line of credit, every retirement account, every insurance policy, and every password he might change the moment he realized I wasn't coming home to cry or negotiate. By noon, my marriage had been reduced to a series of legal tasks. There was something strangely clear about that. Before lunch, Lydia filed for a temporary financial restraining order. Nothing dramatic. No officers showing up at my house. Just enough to stop either of us from draining joint accounts, moving large amounts of money, or playing games with marital assets while the divorce petition was being prepared. She also drafted a letter to the Mercer Family Trust Administrator requesting an immediate internal review of recent disbursement activity connected to Helen's charitable subaccount. The letter was carefully written. It accused no one directly. It simply stated that I had reason to believe confidential trust documents had been accessed improperly and that I was preserving electronic evidence related to that concern. "Now," Lydia said as she placed the signed letter into a file, "there's the matter of Graham Mercer." I knew his name would come up. Even so, hearing it spoken aloud tightened something inside my chest. "He's not a primary beneficiary," I said. "Helen is still alive. It's her trust." "He's also the named successor co-trustee if Helen becomes incapacitated," Lydia replied. "And if Derek has interfered with anything in that trust, Graham will eventually find out one way or another. I'd rather he hear it from someone with evidence than from his brother with a prepared story." That was exactly what I would have advised a client. It was also exactly what I did not want to do. Graham Mercer had always made me feel as though he could hear the sentence I wasn't saying. He had none of Derek's effortless charm and all of the quiet weight Derek spent his life trying to imitate. He was 10 years older, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with a few silver strands at his temples, and so deliberate in everything he did that even his silence seemed meaningful. When Derek and I first married, I used to think Graham seemed older than his years because he never tried to act young. He didn't flirt with waitresses, boast about his golf scores, or call women sweetheart in parking lots. He listened. He observed. He had the unsettling habit of asking one precise question and then waiting long enough for the real answer to appear. He was also Derek's brother, and I wasn't naive enough to believe blood meant nothing. Lydia read my expression immediately. "You don't have to trust him emotionally," she said. "You only need to decide whether he's the kind of man who would protect his mother's assets if he believed they were in danger." "Yes," I answered before I could stop myself. The speed of that answer surprised me. Not because it wasn't true, but because I didn't have to think about it. Lydia nodded as though she had expected no other response. "Then call him. Keep it factual. Don't add opinions. Don't mention the affair unless it becomes necessary. You're not asking him to take your side in a divorce. You're informing him about a possible trust breach involving his mother." I left her office with a folder under one arm, a list of next steps in my bag, and the strange feeling that I had stepped onto a road I would have to follow all the way to the end, whether I wanted to or not. Richmond in late April was bright and damp, filled with blooming dogwoods and courthouse traffic. Men in suits crossed Franklin Street carrying coffee. A woman wearing hospital scrubs sat outside the federal courthouse talking on her phone with the tired confidence of someone managing both a hospital floor and a teenager. The city looked almost offensively normal. I sat in my car for 6 minutes before calling Graham. He answered on the third ring. Not hello. Not even a greeting. Just my name, spoken quietly and evenly, as though someone had already warned him that something was wrong and he was simply waiting to learn what form it had taken. Do you have 10 minutes? I asked. There was a brief pause. Yes. I'm not calling about Derek as my husband, I said. I'm calling about Derek and your mother's trust. Silence. Not confused silence. The kind that comes when someone becomes completely still. Where are you? He asked. In my car outside Lydia Shaw's office. I'm 15 minutes away. Stay there. He didn't ask whether I was okay. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't waste time expressing outrage before hearing the facts. That shouldn't have comforted me. But somehow it did.